Hey, good evening, everyone. This is Erika, Bernando's oldest grandchild, and it is Sunday, June 14th, and the Knicks have won the national championship. I had to say that. It's a long time coming, not since 1973 when I was a mere 10 years old. But tonight's topic is Bernando once again, and we are continuing on, or I'm sharing with you different memories I have of, at this point, we're talking about June 4th and June 5th of 2013, when now he's really, in the middle of his book promotional tour in New York City that so many of you helped make possible. We had 19 donors at the time who helped make this possible for him to come here. So I want to get right into it, and I want to talk about June 4th. There were two things that went on. Well, actually, there was one thing that went on June 4th. Of course, we had quite a busy week up until that point, and on June 4th, we had a little bit of a slower pace, having more time to kind of relax and all of that in the morning before the lecture that he was giving in the event space downstairs from where he was staying at the Sanctuary Retreat and Guest House at 196A Stanton Street on the Lower East Side of New York City, really just a few blocks away from the Williamsburg Bridge. So this was a ticketed event that I had organized for him, and we had seating, and we had visitors, we had guests actually, many of them local, but some of them who came from quite far away just to hear Bernando speak. I remember talking to one couple who I thanked them for coming, and I said, just out of curiosity, where did you come from? And they said, oh, we came from New England. They had driven hours just to hear Bernando speak. I should mention also, prior to that, there was someone that the sanctuary wanted to support who was trying to do a fresh juice business, and so they had squeezed kind of different juices and had those available to the guests if they wanted to do a little tasting. I remember watermelon, I remember cantaloupe, I think I seem to remember spinach. So that was just sort of a little nicety because, of course, Bernando was also very much into juicing. And there is a pinned post on the main page here where I explain, but also Bernando explains in his own book how he never threw away everything and how he would keep the peels and so on of things that would normally be thrown away to make fresh juice from. So that just seemed to be a nice compliment to his overall message and what he was going to be presenting that evening. So the event was to begin at 7 p.m. and run until 9:30, which essentially meant that he would be speaking from 7 to 9, and there would be time enough for Q&A, and then also if anyone wanted to buy a book or have a book signed by him at the end of that. So once again, because Beyond 100, How to Live Well into Your Second Century, was going to be released on his birthday on August 17th when he would turn 112 years old, it was in digital format. In other words, the cutting edge technology of the day was Apple had come out with ebooks or electronic books, and that's how this book was originally published. So he did not have any printed paper books to sign at that time. So we had a store of his original book, Age Less, Live More, How to Achieve Health and Vitality at 107 Years and Beyond, available for people who wanted to sign the book. I also want to give out a shout out to Greg, who came to the lecture. He's a local to New York City because he had seen the there was a guy whose name was, I'm trying to remember what his first name was, but there was a guy named Wilbur, and he used to make a point of recognizing centenarians, people who had reached the age of 100 in the United States. And one year he recognized Bernando. And so because of this, Bernando had a certain amount of, recognition amongst the local population who watched that and was interested in longevity, and that nice mention that Mr. Wilbur, I'll try and find the graphic for that, put up. So Greg actually came, because I spoke to him afterwards, how did you come here? He said, well, I'm already familiar with your grandfather. And I'm like, really? How? And he said, because he had seen him being mentioned on that show. So I want to just mention that, of course, as usual, Bernando was dressed very nicely. He was wearing a two-piece suit. He deigned not to wear a tie because it was quite warm. It's the month of June. And a nice white shirt, but that he was standing the entire time he was speaking. So for a 111-year-old man who's speaking about health to stand the entire time, again, he was astute enough to understand that this would make a great impression upon people. Because normally when you see, elderly people, they're sitting in a chair or they're wheelchair bound. So he really wanted to impress upon people the benefits of taking care of your health consistently on a daily basis. And to that end, the importance of exercise. For him, his favorite mode of exercise was walking. It was free, it was good for your circulation, it was something you could do almost anywhere. Of course, Bernando did that outside, and of course he would also do that inside on his little walking treadmill when the weather was bad, from the comfort of his own home. So Bernando's custom would be to introduce himself by name, by where he was born. He was born in Victoria, Brazil, August 17th, 1901, and then he would come around to saying that even though he had lived in New York City, which was a metropolis, which was considered to be one of the most polluted places on earth, he had lived there for 90 years. And not only had he lived there for 90 years, but he had thrived there for 90 years, and essentially was demonstrating how important it is to take care of your health, and that if you do so, you could even live in a place that's considered crowded and, dirty and all of that, and actually thrive. So, of course, Bernando grew up in New York City. He arrived in New York about 1905, 1906, when he was about 5 years old, immigrating with his dad, first stopping in Philadelphia and then spending some time in Cuba because it was too cold in the winter for little Bernando, who was used to tropical weather, and then settling, in Harlem with his dad. So that meant that, for all extent and purposes, 1906 to 1916 to 1926 to 1936, 1946, 1956, 1966, 1976, 1986, up until the early 1990s, he lived in New York City. So this was a great segue into him talking about his own father, Bernando Lopalo Sr., and the very important lessons by example and precept that his father impressed upon him about the importance of taking care of his health on a daily basis. Bernando's father was a medical doctor, and he was also an herbalist. These are things that he had learned in his native country of Brazil, but he also wanted to pursue a medical career. So he eventually opened his own medical practice in Harlem. And he would sometimes make house calls, and Bernando, being a very curious, precocious child and also having an excellent relationship with his father, would observe his father and question his father, and then eventually his father would impress upon him some very important principles on how to live a long and healthy life. So when Bernando would talk about this, people would ask him, well, what's your secret? He would say, obedience and moderation. Now, for the modern mind, the concept of obedience is either A, completely foreign, since Americans are accustomed to doing whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, all the time, or it may represent oppression, feelings of oppression, or, being, regimented, in a way that is not pleasant, that is not positive. But that's not at all what Bernando meant, and that was not at all his experience. So when he meant obedience to the instructions of his own father. So again, Bernando Lapallo Sr. taught by example and taught through instruction and through conversation to Bernando the importance of taking care of one's health, every single day. Bernando's own father lived to be about 97 years old. And when he had Bernando, I think great-grandpa was kind of up there in age, but of course he didn't look like it because he had always taken care of his health. So when I think about Bernando mentioning that he lost his father when he was at sea, because Bernando was a seaman, he said that he was about 34 years old when his father died. So if you take the age 97 and you subtract 34 from it, what do you get? You get, basically what I'm trying to say is that, okay, let me just do that. So 97, 34, 363. Okay, so that means that Bernando's father conceived Bernando, or I should say had Bernando. Of course, his mother, Mattie Carr, gave birth to him, but this means that he was already 63 years old. That means he was my age, 63, when he became a dad. That means that he conceived Bernando when he was 62. But again, my great-grandfather was by no means a feeble old man at the age of 63, barely hanging on, right? That means that my great-grandfather was opening his medical practice up in Harlem when, Bernando was, I'm going to say when Bernando was, around the age of, 9 years old, right? This is incredible. So that's just to show you already, the kind of mindset that runs through that side of the family, and the kind of benefits and how sharp you can stay and how physically fit you can stay if you are consistent with your health on a regular basis. So Bernando would explain to people that his father instructed him not to overeat. Not to overeat. Very important. To drink plenty of water. To eat plenty of fresh fruits and green vegetables. Bernando was not raised on, as far as I can tell, he was not raised on a diet of fried chicken or pork or beef or any of that. He really grew up eating seafood. He had a great love for seafood, and he was also a seaman. So in other words, when you're eating seafood, it's rich in omega-3 fatty acids, especially if you're eating fatty fish. And New York City at that time had a very thriving seafood economy because we had, for example, 1 billion to 2 billion oysters in the New York harbor alone. And my grandfather explained to me that when he decided to open up a fish and chip business in Jersey City on Jackson Avenue, he used to be able to go with his business partner to the Rockaways and literally catch whitefish by hand at night, no net needed. So there was an abundance of seafood here at the time before, unfortunately, everything became overfished, and now we've got these global tankers coming in here and taking away all our fish. I digress. Okay. Also by avoiding intoxicants. So Bernando was not a drinker. He didn't drink alcohol. He used to say that his father said to him, "If you're not a drinker, what are you doing in a bar?" So he discouraged Bernando from getting involved in habits that were going to cut back on his life, his vitality, and then, of course, in the Prohibition era, you could get arrested for being in a speakeasy. And actually, Bernando has a pretty funny story about that he talks about in his book, Age Less, Live More. So he had a lot of faith in the words of his father. The other funny anecdote that I remember Bernando telling me was he told me one time that his colleagues, his peers, offered him a reefer one time. Of course, that's kind of the old-fashioned name for a joint or, marijuana. And they said, "Hey, man, you want some of this reefer? It'll make you feel good." And Bernando replied, "I already feel good." So he didn't feel any need, he didn't feel any compunction or need to imbibe any kind of substance that was going to alter his frame of mind or, as he saw it, create an addiction or impinge on his health. He really had he was very sober, but he was high on life. Now, he wouldn't fault somebody else for that or make somebody else feel bad about it. He had excellent social skills, but it wasn't something that he wanted to indulge in. His father didn't do that. He had a very strong bond with his father. In fact, this is making me remember another anecdote now about him knowing Fats Waller. So Fats Waller, if you're not familiar, was a very popular musician in the 30s who accompanied himself and sang, and he also used to play rent parties because during the Great Depression, people would throw rent parties in order to raise the money to raise their rent. And so Fats Waller was a frequent featured performer at these rent parties. And he would ask Bernando for a nickel. He'd say, give me some gas, so he could just take the subway to get to these gigs that he had. And I remember Grandpa saying to me one time, he said, "Well, I hope they're paying you, for this gig that you're doing." And Fats replied to him, "Oh, they're paying me in whiskey." And Bernando thought to himself, "What?" So, again, he didn't say anything. He didn't voice, his, I guess you could say disdain. Yeah, his disdain for such a thing, because he knew it was cutting the man's life short. And he did not think that that was proper payment. So there you go. There's a couple of anecdotes. So also the importance of sleeping soundly. He slept soundly at night. Also the way he managed stress. So instead of it managing him. So for example, Bernando would spend time in nature, even when he lived in the city. He would go out to the Rockaways and walk on the sand, on the beach in the morning. He would do his exercise. He would take a walk in the park, whatever he needed to do. This was all of him explaining to people the secrets of his longevity, which he would say was no secret at all, which would be a part of this talk that he was giving. Also, because of his strong work ethic and rising very early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, taking care of himself and then putting in a full day's work, because he was a working man. My grandfather was a working class man. By the time he came home at night, he was ready to relax. He was tired after a full day's work, and he slept like a baby. So that was important also. I think his sound sleep and his sleep patterns also was a very strong factor in his strong memory, because your sleep cortex is in the front of the brain, and people that are deprived of sleep consistently cannot remember things. You may have even experienced this yourself. You had a very poor night's sleep, and then you're trying to go about your tasks the next day, and things are just slipping your mind. The other thing about Bernando that he would talk about was his routine, his consistent level of self-care. So a big part of that he would try and impress upon people, also because his father told him how important your feet are, because you're standing on them all day. And when you live in a city, not only are you walking on concrete and walking up and down stairs and perhaps standing all day, your feet are also enclosed in shoes that may be tight-fitting, socks and shoes. And so this can create bunions and calluses. So as part of his nightly routine, he would soak his feet in Epsom salts and extra virgin olive oil, which would help remove the dirt on the feet, make his feet soft, use a pumice stone, and soak them in the hottest water as he could stand, and of course use Castile soap. So that was another part. So he never had, those aching, tired, calloused, bunioned feet that cause so many people discomfort. So he would explain that to people because, of course, if you haven't looked at it already, I posted a reflexology chart the other day for you on the page, because Bernando was a reflexologist. He studied reflexology at NYU, and he was also a doctor of podiatry. He got his first certificate, or at least there is a certificate of him becoming a doctor of podiatry in 1955, and then he renewed his podiatry license when he went to NYU, I believe, around that time, because of course he also got his massage license, having gone to the Swedish Institute of Massage, which I talk about that in an earlier video. So he had a very high level of self-care. He was disciplined about following his routine, and he did not let anybody, and I mean anybody, get in the way of that. Nobody. He did not change his routine for anybody. Not me, not his wife, not his kids, nobody. He loved himself. He definitely loved himself. So, okay, so now moving on as to what else he talked about. Of course, he had optimal nutrition. So, again, those fresh fruits and fresh vegetables, green vegetables, he would go and shop for these things and prepare everything himself and make it fresh. He didn't eat frozen foods. He ate fresh fruits. The other thing about Bernando was his ability to relax. This was notable. He would, after a long day, he would go into his den, or his man cave, as people would call it, kick up his feet, take off his shoes, kick up his feet. He had a nice lazy boy, nice comfortable chair, turn on the ball game. Baseball was his favorite pastime, and watch that. Or he might read a book. And frequently, when he was doing that, Bernando would doze off. Bernando would doze off and take a nap, which is something that, of course, my brother and I used to love to tease him about that, because, we'd say, oh, it looks like he's catching flies. He'd snore a little bit, and his mouth would be open while he was relaxing. So, we made fun of it then, but the truth of the matter is that Bernando was on to something. He was on to something. So if you have the ability, to take a nap at some point, during your work day, that's ideal. I mean, with so many people working remotely at home, it's probably possible. But if not, a sound night's sleep is certainly very important. Okay, so now I want to move on to Well, actually, let me just finish. So it was a great talk. There was a filmmaker named John Halpern who came to film the evening. I was looking for the video clip, or a little video clip from that evening, which seems to have become lost, amongst the internet. So I will keep looking for that. And there you have it. So there is, some record at least of Bernando speaking that evening. So that was a lot of fun. It was very enjoyable. And then the next day, on June 5th, it was time just to kind of have some fun, because now we're leading up to Bernando's 112th birthday. So there was a big birthday event planned for him on the 6th, but on the 5th of June, it just so happened that there's a great guy named Gordon Polatnik, and Gordon has a business, I think he's still running it, called Big Apple Jazz. So Gordon was a big jazz buff. He loved jazz. And so if you know anything about New York City, you know that New York City was a great center of jazz for a very long time. With, of course, Duke Ellington lived here, Count Basie was here, we had a great big band scene, there were great places to go like the Savoy, there was the Cotton Club, there was places like the Bandbox, and then of course later on, in the 40s, there was all the clubs, downtown where the greats would used to play, and then even later on, Thelonious Monk, someone like Thelonious Monk would come out of San Juan Hill. So, jazz in New York City had, it was a very strong thing, thing going on. And of course, when Bernando, was growing up and coming of age, there were plays like Shuffle Along that was done by Noble and Sissel. So, at any rate, Bernando really, he loved entertainers, he loved entertainment, he loved live music. It's something that he really enjoyed. So, in my conversation, or me thinking about Gordon Polatnik, we went up to a place called Dino's, which was short for Dinosaurs Barbecue, which was located, and they're still up there, on 125th Street and Riverside Drive at the Viaduct. So the Hudson River, runs all the way up the length of Manhattan. So essentially it was in Harlem, but it was in a part of Harlem down by the river, because there was a great band that was going to be playing that night called the Harlem Renaissance Orchestra. And the Harlem Renaissance Orchestra, I believe, was the band leader, and I think was founded by a gentleman named Illinois Jacquet. So I'm just learning a little bit more about Illinois Jacquet, but he seems to have played with some heavy hitters, back in his day. At any rate, that was the band that was performing that night, and I could personally vouch to Grandpa that they were a great band. How did I know that? Because a few years before, when I was exploring different venues to sing at myself, I had gone up to a place in Harlem, trying to remember the name of this place now, and I had gone there a couple of times, and I got a treat when I went there one night, and it was the Harlem Renaissance Orchestra. I mean, it was wonderful. And also, I'm not sure if it was the same night or if perhaps it was another night, but I also went up and got to hear the great, I think her name was Etta Jones. So I'm not talking about Etta James. There was another local singer that we had up here who was wonderful, who was very, she was up there in age, who sang that night. And she might have been singing with the Harlem Renaissance Orchestra. I'm going to have to go through my notes. So needless to say, even though neither of us ate barbecue, neither of us ate ribs, Neither of us ate, beef or anything like that. We managed to find some things on the menu, or at least I did, because the kickoff for the event, I believe it started around, 7 p.m. in the evening? I think it was something like that. I actually posted the poster up here from that night so you can look at it. And so, as was Bernardo's habit, he would always eat beforehand, right? He wouldn't wait. Actually, I might have eaten with him. So, because I had to go pick him up, and then we took a cab all the way up to Harlem. So, he would eat beforehand. He would eat his dinner somewhere between like 5 and 6 o'clock. That's the other thing about him. He ate at regulated times. So, we ate, so when we got up there, we weren't starving or going to eat a bunch of, junk as far as he was concerned, pretty much as far as I was concerned, because we just didn't eat that kind of stuff. I think I ordered something, like I managed to order some greens, making sure it didn't have any pork or anything like that in it, because of course you want to patronize a venue. You don't want to just sit there and not order anything. So, we did have some class. So, anyway, so now, as far as the band was concerned and some of the things they were playing, he really appreciated the music because it was smooth music. And then towards the end of, the evening, they started playing the Lindy Hop. Now, this really tickled Bernardo Pink. Why? Because, first of all, he remembered this dance, the Lindy Hop, from when he was a young man. So the Lindy Hop was named after a very famous pioneer in aviation whose name was Charles Lindbergh. So Charles Lindbergh was born in 1902. So he was really a contemporary of Bernardo's. Bernardo was born in 1901. He was born in 1902, and Charles Lindbergh made his solo transatlantic flight from Roosevelt Field in East Garden City, Long Island, all the way to Paris in 33 hours and 13 minutes. He departed, I believe, on April 28th in 1927. So this was a sensation. This was the first transatlantic flight. The first solo transatlantic flight, which of course, as we know now, would open the way and pave the way to show, yes, this was actually possible. And now, of course, we all get on, or many of us get on transatlantic flights to go from New York to Paris without even thinking about it. So just to give a few more props to Charles Lindbergh, he was flying a Ryan airplane. It was custom built for him. It cost a little over $10,000 to make. In that year, in the 20s, actually, it was probably started to be built. Well, actually, could have been built in 1927. I have to double check that. Could have started in 26 and 27, but needless to say, part of Lindbergh's motivation, he had already had a pretty fun career, he really liked flying planes, was a prize to the tune of $25,000. It was called the Ortigue Prize because there was a New York hotelier named Ortigue. I believe the man's name was Howard Ortigue, who was going to give a prize, and of course that was going to draw publicity for his hotel. So he did that flight. So just as an aside, Roosevelt Field, that again was in East Garden City, Long Island, was named in honor of the son of Theodore Roosevelt, who was one of our presidents of the United States, after his son Quentin Roosevelt, who was the youngest son of Teddy Roosevelt, who died in an aerial combat over France in 1918 during the First World War. Some other fun facts about the Roosevelt Hotel, or I should say the Roosevelt Airfield, was that Amelia Earhart also flew out of there. Today, apparently, there's a museum there called the Cradle of Aviation. if you're ever in the area and you want to learn about some of the history of flying, because unfortunately they built a shopping mall on the Roosevelt Field. Okay, so at any rate, now getting back to Bernardo's amusement at people doing the Lindy Hop. I mean, that brought him probably right back to his 20s, because when Lindbergh finished his flight in 1927, in April of 1927, Bernardo would have been 26 years old. So we all remember what it's like to be 26, right? Go out of the town, go dancing. So when the old folks, as far as he was concerned, got up and started doing the Lindy Hop, or, doing what they could of the Lindy Hop, although there were some younger people there, Bernardo started giggling. This just amused him to no end. He was like, I remember this. I remember the Lindy Hop. They named after this at the Charles Lindbergh, because he hopped over the Atlantic Ocean, right? So the Lindy, short for Lindbergh Hop. He just thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'll never forget how much he giggled about that. I still remember this older gentleman there who wore kind of a very bad wig, kind of a toupee, to make himself look younger, God bless him, to dance. Of course, Bernardo, at this point, still had most of his hair. It's just these funny little things, a night on the town with Grandpa. Okay, so now, another thing that occurred this evening, and I do have a video up on YouTube, is that we went to a back room where Bernardo was able to have a conversation with Gordon Polatnik, who was very interested in what Bernardo might know about jazz in Harlem. Of course, Gordon was actually interested in a time period that was a little bit earlier, than Bernardo would have been old enough, right, to go out clubbing about. But still, it was still a nice conversation. And the person who I managed to rope in to film that is a very talented videographer whose name is Kurt Ritta. So thank you, Kurt, for taking time out to come up to Harlem to film Bernardo and Gordon having a conversation. Now, some of the things that I remember about this conversation was actually, I think the tape had run out. The tape had run out because Kurt's battery had died, and he didn't have an extra battery, so he couldn't record the rest of the conversation. But essentially, this part of the conversation revolved around Bernardo having a little run-in with Bill Bojangles Robinson. So, for those of you who are historians of Harlem, know about the culture of Harlem, know about the culture of dance, if you've been a fan of Shirley Temple, there is a film where Bill Bojangles Robinson and Shirley Temple tap dance together. It's a very, very famous clip. So look that up. So Bill Bojangles Robinson had been given the title, the mayor of Harlem, I believe, and had even received sort of like a plaque, an award from it. So he was a very, very popular entertainer, and, he worked regularly up in Harlem. But the other thing about Bill Bojangles Robinson that you might not know is that he was a gambling man. He was a gambler. So, we're talking about like the 30s, okay? We're talking about the 30s and the era of prohibition and speakeasies and gambling and all of that. So my grandfather told me that he went to this gambling joint. People were playing cards. A friend of his was there. So I don't know if Grandpa was gambling. It doesn't really strike me as a gambling man. I don't think he was, but at any rate, a friend of his was there, and he went. And one of the people that was gambling in this particular game was Mr. Bojangles, was Bill Robinson. And apparently, there was a young man who was Bernardo's kitchen boy. So what does that mean? So Bernando was a chef. And so when you're working in a kitchen like that, you've got to crank out a lot of food for guests. There's different positions, different responsibilities that are allocated to people in the kitchen. So his kitchen boy, probably someone who would have helped set him up, right, help prep foods or maybe wash dishes, whatever it was that this particular duties of this person were, was there involved in this game. And who won the game? His kitchen boy actually won the game. But Mr. Bojangles Robinson didn't care about that, and apparently, put his hands out to like gather all the money for himself. This infuriated Bernando. And so he just popped off and he said, "Who do you think you are? You don't have the right to take all that money. You didn't win the money." He said, "I knew him." I remember him saying to me, he said, "I knew him. He was my kitchen boy." He said, "You think that just because you're the mayor of Harlem, that you have the right to take this money, to steal this money in front of everyone?" So apparently, my grandfather threatened to shoot Bill Bojangles Robinson if he didn't let go of the money and give it to the kitchen boy. At which point, his friend who was with him said, No, Q, no, Q, don't do that. Don't do it, Q, no. So this kind of surprised me because, everyone's got their limits, right? Because, everyone thought of my grandfather as being very serene, and he was. But apparently, he couldn't stand cheating. And the fact of the matter is, my grandfather did possess a gun because my grandfather had gotten a gun from Frank Costello. So now if you know anything about the mob, you know that the Godfather that was played by Marlon Brando, the character was modeled after Frank Costello. Because Frank Costello had a raspy way of speaking. Right, he had a raspy way of speaking with his voice. So that is one of the characteristics that people knew around these parts that Marlon Brando modeled his character after for playing the Godfather in the film by Francis Ford Coppola. So, in a nutshell, this is my understanding. My grandfather used to cook at a place called McGinnis's. They had two locations. They had one in Sheepshead Bay, and at one point they had another location. I think it was they had another location on 48th Street and Broadway, sort of right smack in the middle of Times Square in the theater district and the entertainment industry. And so Frank would only let Bernando touch his food. He would come in, I believe this might have been the one in Sheepshead Bay, and he said, "I don't want anyone else touching my food except for Bernando. I don't want anyone else touching my food." And my grandfather, one of his specialties was making crab cakes. So as I mentioned earlier, at this time in New York was very, very rich in seafood. Oysters, mussels, whitefish, crabs, anything, lobsters, right? Lobsters from Long Island, all of that. So when he would make it for Mr. Costello, he would bring it out personally and serve him personally from the kitchen. And then Frank would get out his wallet and he'd peel off $1, $2, $3, $300 or $400 for my grandfather. He said, "This is for your kids. This is for your kids," right? So my grandfather had a gun. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think the way that ended up is that Mr. Robinson released the money and gave it to the kitchen boy. So there you go. There's a little anecdote about Bernando. I love it. Okay. So, that wasn't filmed at the time, and I remember thinking, shoot, maybe it's good. Maybe it's good that, this wasn't filmed, right? And then I kind of heard this off camera. But now, not that, I'm condoning violence per se, but, now, that Bernando would be approaching his 125th birthday this August 17th. You know, we got to tell the tales, got to tell the stories that we know. So there you have it. All right. So it is 7:49. I started this at 7. I just want to thank the people that are here watching right now on Facebook. If you're watching later on YouTube, thank you very much for watching, liking, sharing, commenting. So we've got Nora Pollock here. Thank you very much, Nora. We've got Juhar Singh Bhatti here. Very good. We've got Clara Canty here. Thank you for watching. And we've got Rhonda Long for watching. So if you want to make any comments here, if you have any questions, things that I didn't cover, you can ask them. And I will be back soon with basically the last, day that Bernando spent in New York during his promotional book tour, which was another fun day where we're going to talk about his birthday party, his 112th birthday party, here in New York, before he would take off after a fabulous week and fly back to his adopted home in Arizona, in Mesa, Arizona, where he would proceed to have a whole bunch of other birthday parties to celebrate his birthday. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, my name is Erika, and the whole theme of the series is Bernando's promotional book tour in New York City, which occurred in June of 2013, where he was promoting his book, Beyond 100, How to Live Well into Your Second Century at the age of 111. Be well, and remember to keep your liver and your colon clean. Until next time.